Today, it's all about photographic timing with Canon Explorer of Light, Damian Strohmeyer, on Behind the Shot. Hi, welcome to the show. I'm Steve Brazill, your host, and this is the show where we try and get inside the mind of great photographers by taking a closer look behind one of their shots from conception to completion, all the stories and challenges that happen in between. And I've got a great show lined up for you today. Before we get into it, I do want to remind you that with this show and all the shows, if you want to see the blog post I wrote about my guest, a small sample gallery of their work, all you got to do is head over to the website at behindtheshot.tv. As well, this podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts in either an audio only or a video format. And if where you get your podcast does not support video, that's okay. Just head on over to YouTube. And when you're there, if you like what we're doing, please head down, hit subscribe, click the bell, give us a thumbs up, all of that type stuff. It definitely helps with the algorithm. One thing I want to remind you of as well before I bring my guest on is the workshop that we've got coming up in October. It's the Wanderer's Photographic Workshop. And the best way to explain this, or how I've been explaining it, because it's kind of complex, is a chance for you to experience the people, the history, the music, and the food of a destination city all in one photo workshop. If you want information on it, you can head over to the website, which is wanderersphoto.com. But again, this is going to be a crazy workshop with 4 different instructors, and all the details are over at that website. So head on over there. And that brings us to my guest today. My guest is Boston-based. I think of him as a sports photographer. The truth is, it's more sports and commercial, and the guy can shoot pretty much anything you want. Damian Strohmeyer. Damian, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. And the reason I say you can shoot pretty much anything, I love the description that you have in your bio. And I'm going to try and quote here. A photographer who works with people, telling their stories in photography ranging from portraiture to fast-moving sports, to documentary news stories. And yet even that, to me, doesn't kind of sum up the fact that you are a long-standing photojournalist. With all the different things you do, when somebody says to you, oh, you're a photographer, what do you shoot? What do you tell them?
2 things. One, I tell them I photograph whatever somebody will write me a check for. That's one thing.
Oh, there we go. I like that.
And then, the other thing is I always tell people is that I've always considered myself a photojournalist who happened to photograph sports.
Okay. So I want to dive into that a second. Why the emphasis, I think I may know, but why the emphasis on photojournalist first?
I think photojournalists are the recorders of history in our time, and that they play a vital role in recording our news and reporting our news and keeping America informed. I guess a vital function in our world of communication.
I agree with you. And it's one of the reasons I'm a little sad that the world of photojournalism has suffered in years late, where outlets have let people go and given iPhones to reporters and have them do the photography stuff. Because I think when you get somebody like you with your credentials photographing whatever it is, there is a skill level there that brings a more, I don't know what the word, I was going to say honest story, but the honest isn't the word I'm looking for. A more complete story based on the way you shoot. What is your thought on the world of photojournalism today?
Well, I don't want to use the term circling the drain, because that wouldn't be fair, because I do think there are people out there that are doing really good work. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people have been forced out of the business, which is unfortunate. However, I think it will survive, and I think it's really, there are going to be a lot of changes in the industry, but the recording and the reporting of our news has to remain. As a democratic country, it has to remain. You can't take it away. So I think there's a future. I'm just not exactly sure how we get to the future, but I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think no matter what, I'm of the mindset that still there's something about a frozen moment in time that will always be beneficial to a society on many different levels, on a granular level and an overarching view level. I'm going to use this as a photojournalistic career, but You worked with Sports Illustrated for 25 years, and is my count correct? 72 covers?
The 25 years I'm not so sure about. It could be 24, it could be 28. I'm not sure. I was there a long time. The covers, that's accurate. Yeah, 72.
So I've had people that have photographed Sports Illustrated covers on the show before, and it's a big deal when they've got 2, right? 3 covers, you're amazing. You have so many covers and you've shot so many defining moments in sports, right? World Series, World Cup, Stanley Cup, the Olympics, 27 Super Bowls. Do you ever sit back and kind of look at that career in awe of yourself?
I don't think you ever should take yourself too seriously. I mean, like I feel like I'm a competent and, hardworking, industrious photographer who has a proven track record of, being able to make the right images. But I am much more concerned about how I'm perceived as a family man and as a father and a neighbor and all those kinds of things. It's like, I don't try to take myself too seriously. I mean, I understand I have an important job, but I,
Right.
Don't take myself that seriously.
I admire that, but I just have to tell you from the outside looking in, you're pretty amazing at what you do. You do, and not only what you shoot, but you have translated your craft into passing it on to others. You do group and individual photo lessons. And as a Canon Explorer of Light, as I mentioned at the beginning, you also do speaking engagements and you teach through being a Canon Explorer of Light. And you bring the fact that you brought up family. You met your wife, who is a photographer for the Boston Globe, or was, at the Calgary Olympics, correct?
Yes, absolutely. That's the best story, and of all my stories, that's easily the best one. Because we've been married 31 years now. We've raised 3 children. Educated 3 children. It's like really what you stand for, what I stand for. I mean, it's the most important thing in my life. My marriage and my children are close second. And we met in Calgary at the Olympics. That was. We didn't know it so much at the time that it was going to go that way. We were friendly, but it ended up being, something that is always a great source of interest.
It's just so unique. I mean, you travel all the way to Calgary to photograph the Olympics because your wife is a photographer, like I say, for the Boston Globe. In fact, a guest I had on recently, Estra Suarez, knows your wife apparently and thinks very highly of her work as well. So here's the question. There's 2 professional photographers in the same house. So first of all, birthdays for the kids must be a nightmare. But aside from that, come on, Mom and Dad, no more pictures, please. But here's my thing. I'm curious about the crosstalk that happens. Do you think your photography in any way influences your wife's and vice versa? Does your wife's photographic eye, I mention this a lot, I believe every photographer has their own, when we talk about finding our style, I think every photographer has a photographic eye. That's what they need to find. Does your photographic eye influence her and vice versa?
Joanne is a wonderful photographer. I always say it's really hard only being the second best photographer in your own house. I mean, it's like you're already starting out in second place. But her style of working is far more documentary and a little more off the cuff than mine is. My work is a little more thought out, so to speak. Joanne's a great reactionary photographer, though. She is very, very good at bringing home the moment. She's an assignment editor now, doesn't do as much photography now, but she's a wonderful photographer. And yeah, I trust her judgment tremendously. And, that makes for interesting, comments about how you do things. It gets a little heated sometimes, but not we've been married a long time. So it usually blows over by morning.
Do you critique each other's shots?
Well, not really.
I mean, do you ever shoot a shot like take a hypothetical? You're shooting I don't know why I'm going Super Bowl, but you're shooting the Super Bowl and you've got like 10 shots in a series. Honey, which one of these would you pick?
Yeah, some of that goes on. Absolutely. Yeah. Not so much on sports stuff because Joanne's not a great sports fan, which is interesting because she tries really hard to, because, I'm kind of a sports person, but, it's not something that she knows a lot about. But in portraiture, a lot of times I'll say, what do you like? Was it like coming from this direction? Like, do you like it more as a horizontal? Do you like it more as a square? I mean, stuff like that. Yeah, we talk about that all the time. And she's a very good editor because that's what she's doing now. So she's a very good editor. Good
You
person. I trust
mentioned
her tremendously.
you mentioned she's great at the moment, and it's interesting to me because looking at your portfolio, it is full of pictures with what I would call perfect timing. Like, you are so good at capturing that moment. As I was looking through your portfolio, I literally had this thought. In the movies where people slow down time, things happen in slow motion, even though they're really happening in real time. And we've all probably experienced that sensation. It's almost to me as though you're seeing these things unfold in front of you at a different speed than the rest of us, where you're able to capture that perfect moment. How are you so good at getting that?
Well, I mean, experience obviously helps a lot, but I also, when I came up, I'm going to talk, kind of from a sport angle here now because I think that's more what you're talking about. Um, I studied the masters. I studied Walter Yost. I studied Neil Leifer. I studied Rich Clarkson. I studied those guys. I want to know how they did it. I wanted to see what they did and what the process was. And I do think that I learned a bit about positioning and game flow and all those kinds of things that allow you to be in the right place at the right time. It doesn't always, the percentages don't always play themselves out, but by and large, if you've done your homework, you're going to know where to be and the right place, and being, not only just being in the right place, but also being the right lens, the right, like
Right.
exposure, stuff like that. Although I do have to say the equipment is so good now, they're making a lot of those choices for you, and it's pretty remarkable that they can.
It's funny that you say that because I just saw a post today from my buddy David Bergman, also an Explorer of
Oh
Light,
yeah, Bergie, yeah.
where he was using an R5 or an R6 on the drum riser. He always does a remote camera on the drum riser, and he made a comment that it's gotten insane because with eye focus and face focus and everything else, even though it's manless, as it were, right? It's not being monitored, it's remote. It just doesn't miss, and it's grabbing it each and every time as far as focus. But you said two things, and that is game flow and positioning. Those are interesting to me. If you were to talk to those people who maybe aspire to be professional sports photographers, but they're photographing their kid's high school game or even their kid's college game. Maybe they're accomplished at a certain level and want to game up a little bit. Is there this topic could go way too deep probably, but is there one tip on either game flow or positioning, or for that matter, both, that you think would help people?
I could just answer that in football. It's just like one that I think every beginning news photographer learned, mostly from guys who were on the sidelines with 4x5 view cameras in their day, and passed that on. It's a really easy one. 10 yards ahead of a good team, 10 yards behind a bad one. So you're positioning, just really simple. It's more like 30 or 40 yards, but when you were shooting a 4x5 speed graphics, that's about right. You were pre-focused at 12 feet or whatever, 15 feet, and hope the play came right to you.
I like that. Okay, so now I want to talk about the 72 covers for Sports Illustrated. Thinking about those, if you picture all 72 of those in your head, right? Like that's possible. Okay, you know what I mean. Is there a common thread, you think, on the images that you've shot? Because you've shot so much great work. Is there a common thread, you think, to those that made cover?
I think so, and I think one of the things is you have to know who you're working for. You have to know the client, and of course, for me, that client was one group for a long time, Sports Illustrated people, and really, even from the administration point, you knew who those guys were, what kind of photograph they liked, what the game telling and game story pictures were, so that you had that opportunity. I've always been pretty editorially based and editorially thinking, so that most of my pictures have a message. It's either the right person or the right play, or those kinds of things that have made covers for me. Yeah, that's probably the basic thing, is that you have to know where to position yourself for the story that you're working on in
Right.
the vein that is going to, in a position that it may put you in the ability to make that cover or that double truck opener or whatever it might be.
So in some ways, it's communication. It's understanding through either talking to your editor or your assignment person or whoever you're dealing with, understanding really through good communication, what is our goal here?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then using your skill and your experience to simply fulfill the goal.
Yeah, it's I always everybody uses the term team now, which I've used for 35 or 40 years. But that team, starting with the managing editor maybe of the newspaper, trickling through to the photo editor, the director of photography rather, than maybe the individual photo editor who's working on that story, and those people are all contributing to your information source, so we know what we're doing going in. And then if it's a big enough story, obviously, and when we're working Sports Illustrated thing, you were talking about multiple photographers, sometimes 2 or 3 photographers. So we all had to be in sync. And, fortunately,
right.
I work with a wonderful group of guys over the years that, we were pretty selfless about how we did it. If one guy got the cover because they were in the right spot, well, that was good for them that week, but I'll get you next week, that
right.
kind of thing.
Friendly competition, as it were.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Let's go into this shot then, because that's a good setup for it. And if I'm not mistaken, this shot is called Safe at Home. Is that? Do you name all of your shots?
No. I don't know who named that.
Okay, maybe I call it. It may be that I came up with the name on my own. It's possible. I've done that before. I'll call it Safe at Home. I think it was the name of the file or something like that. But this, to me, is the quintessential baseball shot. Like, this is the shot almost any photographer would want to get, but I don't like that phrase, would want to get. Because would want to get means to me, you held the camera up and you pulled the trigger. And there's so much more to this photo than somebody just got it, right? I see your skill level in every aspect of this photo. I mean, it's absolutely amazing to me. So for those that are on the audio version, and before we dissect this thing a little bit, let me just remind everybody, if you want to see the photo, if you're listening to the audio version, head on over to the website, behindtheshot.tv. I've got, and just find this episode, I've got a blog post I wrote about Damian there, and then a small sample gallery of his work. And all the links that we talk about today, those are over there as well. So for those of you listening, as you're driving in your car, don't try looking at the picture. Not good. Just listen. I'm going to try and describe this photo to you. And I find this is a great exercise in understanding photography, is verbally trying to describe it. So picture college baseball. Oregon State Beavers against North Carolina. And Oregon State player is sliding into home, sliding around and past the North Carolina catcher. And everybody's feet are in the air. They're all laying down, but they're laying down with their backs arched and feet up in the air. Chalk is in the air. There's a giant cloud of chalk there. The catcher is actually on the third baseline with his feet towards the baseline and his glove and his head towards home plate, right? Glove hand outreached, trying to touch the runner. The runner clearly came around the back of the batter's box, hand outreached, sliding kind of sideways, trying to touch home plate. The helmet is off. The catcher's mask is actually off and under the chest. And here's where this actually excels to me. The colors are scary vibrant and yet completely lifelike. Like, I can completely picture being in the stands at this time of day with this warm light coming from the back upper left corner, right? Bat laying on the ground in the foreground, like just outside the batter's box towards the pitcher's mound. And even the wherewithal to get the logo in the upper left corner just tucked in there nice and neat. The bat is there, like I say, but not clipped, not cut off. None of the highlights are really clipped. There is literally so much action in this shot that you almost feel like, as you're looking at it, they're going to keep sliding. Did I miss anything?
Well, it worked out pretty good. One of those pictures you're glad you have it. You're better than not having it. It's right up there with as good as I can do, I think. This is an interesting picture. When they did the book Who Shot Sports, they highlight this picture in about a 3-paragraph summary, kind of like what you did just now, Steve, talking about the picture and what's all the right to it. And they talk about, but the person that's doing the critiquing is the director of photography at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, which I tell people that will be the only time that the Museum of Modern Art and Damian Strohmeyer will be mentioned in the same story. That will not happen again. But he describes a lot of the things right. And then what we're talking about here, you're dividing that picture up. That's the third base line actually becomes your leading line. We allowed for the backlight on this, and the light was just absolutely stunning that day. But this happened all the time at that event.
But here's the thing.
Series.
That light is stunning in this photo, but most people would have blown it. I mean, most people would have clipped all the highlights. You happen to get, again, it's what I'm talking about. It's perfect timing. Not only is the third baseline the leading line into the action, but the home plate is the backstop to all that action.
Yeah. Well, well, let me just back up here. So, when we do these kinds of pictures, this is a remote camera. I was not viewing this through the camera when I photographed it. I was photographing it with a trigger attached to the side of my camera. In this same game, I have 2 other versions of this picture, one of which is looser and has the College World Series logo in it, and then one that's shot from a third baseline that is more on the catcher. It shows the catcher more. You can't see it as well because it's from third base. But you have 3 different views of it. This is very typical for us to do in a big game, to set up remote cameras. And the rule of thumb is like, if anything can go wrong, it will with a remote camera. It's always a bit of a happenstance thing. And I had a couple wonderful images at home plate over the years at the College World Series, this being one of them. Another one in the year 2000. It was a very, very nice photograph as well. But those remote cameras, like you're hoping they're right, and like we're adjusting that exposure for that backlight all the time. I mean, the assistant, I'm going back up there. That's and saying, no, you need to open it up a third, or close it down a third, whatever it was. So there's a fair amount of thought that did go into this photograph, but it's as a result of doing the right amount of homework and also calculating those exposures. And I think those of us who learned our sports photography on transparency film, this is not a big deal in digital. In transparency, it's a big deal. It's hard to get it all straight. So I think if you had those lessons from transparency days, you're more apt to get the exposure right on something like this.
So what camera body was this? Do you remember?
Oh God, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was still on film. I can't remember though. It might have been, if it was digital, it would have been one of the very first digital cameras.
Interesting.
But I'm not sure. Right. I really don't remember.
So I want to talk about the technical side for a second.
Okay.
Even though this was a remote camera, for what you shoot in this type of a shot, you could have been sitting in this position and taken this shot, and you would have nailed it. And other people, I think people struggle with 2 things. In this type of light, which is arguably dynamic and harsh, right, at the same time, with this type of light and this type of action, people tend to struggle with focus. So on the cameras that you're shooting today, when you're focusing, do you do single point? I know you're obviously Canon Explorer of Light, so you're shooting Canon. They have the 5-point or 9-point expansion. They have zone AF. they have, which is your preference?
Well, I do have to admit, experimenting recently with the mirrorless, that this eye track thing is like it's pretty crazy. It's pretty amazing. But I'm generally a one point in the middle guy. I like it when
and you
I'm
leave it in the
working.
middle? You don't move it around?
Yeah. Oh no, I'll move it around. Particularly doing a portrait. I'll move it
Right.
around. With your controls and stuff. Yeah, all the time. Actually, I've done that for years. Because I really like, to try to. The beauty of being able to move that focus point around is that you can compose in the way we used to compose on a piece of ground glass in a film camera and actually compose a picture. And I think that's one of the things that's been a negative to the great autofocus we have is that, when it was totally always center weighted, the pictures all look like that. They're all kind of too much, not enough rule of thirds and maybe a little bit too much head on kind of stuff.
Right.
But yeah, that's, I think it's evolving. The mirrorless is evolving and changing things, and as a photographer, that's your job. You got to keep up with the technique and the technical side of things.
One of the things I love about, I'm a Canon shooter myself. This is a 5D Mark IV that I'm shooting through right now.
Oh yeah, nice camera.
One of the things I love about Canon is they have focus presets, I'll call them, called cases 1 through 5 or whatever, for AF sensitivity, acceleration, deceleration, point switching, et cetera, et cetera. Do you go off a default? Do you run one of those cases? If so, do you know what you tend to use, or you just kind of go with how it comes?
If, and this is a big if I were, for example, a newspaper photographer and I was shooting baseball at Fenway Park a lot, like 3 days a week,
Right.
then I would have a case built for that, a set of custom functions that would fit that venue. And we did this sometimes at the Olympics. If you were, for example, maybe you were the hockey guy and your remote cameras, well, you'd have all those things built in every day. So you have to redo them all the time. But I've always kind of liked to, get it right in camera, use your technical skills that you already have and not depend too much on the cameras. It's amazing what the cameras can do. I never want to lose. If I'm going to miss a photograph or lose a photograph, it's going to be because I made the mistake, not because the camera. I asked too much out of the camera.
So for shots like this, let's pretend that you were looking through the viewfinder here, right? Do you have any tips for people that are trying to get a shot like this? I think some people might even get the moment, but they'll miss the focus or they'll miss the light. Any tips you have for the type of stuff that you shoot to get better focus?
Yeah, well, this is a zone focus picture. This is actually zone focus because you're
Full
overhead.
Zone? Full zone?
Yeah, you're horizontal and you're overhead. So, your plane of focus is pretty consistent across the frame because you're at an angle that allows you from one side of the frame to the other that's probably shot at f4, I'm guessing, maybe 5.6, something like that. And that's going to allow you to keep most everything in focus. If you were hand holding that, that's a little different deal. The tendency would be to focus on the runner coming down the baseline. But in this case, he got out of the baseline and slid clear around the catcher. So you might have gotten lucky because the catcher's diving back in where you would normally be focused. But there's a lot going on there for a handheld picture. I wouldn't, I don't know why. I can't remember what my handheld picture looked like of this play. I know I have it, but it's a tricky one because of the light and because of the action is not conventional.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is literally the perfect moment. Where is this camera?
Well, I think this is the old Rosenblatt Stadium. They used to have like a luxury box level, like press box level. And then the local radio and TV from the participating schools would use those rooms to do their live shots and reporting and all that kind of stuff. Well, as the tournament wears on, those boxes open up. So what we were always able to do with the NCAA, people that administer the event, we were always able to kind of convince them to look, see what a great shot this is. If we look down this, and they'd say, well, we don't have that booth we have the booth one to the left. Oh, that won't work. If you had the booth to the left, that line wouldn't be in the center of the frame. So there was some negotiating that went on there between the photographers and the NCAA. And we were really fortunate because the NCAA saw the value of us potentially getting a photograph like this.
So when you're mounting
there's always
the camera,
negotiation involved and stuff like that.
how'd you mount it?
Oh, a bunch of that bogan stuff. I don't know. You can never make too many mistakes when you're doing a remote camera. Safety is obviously issue one. You can't have the thing fall or get. But yeah, it's a magic arm, probably two magic arms. It's probably a 300 millimeter lens secured with a magic arm to the body and a magic arm to the lens, and then clamped. Onto some kind of a, shelf or a, table or something like that that's in that room.
And triggering with what, like a Pocket Wizard type thing?
I think it would have been Pocket Wizard. Yeah, that would have been, before Pocket Wizard, there was another company, but Pocket Wizard's been around for a while. So I'm pretty sure it would have been Pocket Wizard. Obviously, when I first started at Sports Illustrated years ago, we still did remotes like this with zip cord and a hand trigger. So you probably ran 300 or 400 feet of zip line to do a shot like this.
Okay, so I need to understand something. You're in this booth. You're setting this camera up. You're going to trigger remotely, not being able to look through a viewfinder. So you're framing it. You're framing empty space. We talked about having the third baseline in there, but again, the way the logo is in the corner, the triangle shape that you've got literally touching the corner and kissing the corner, the way the chalk line on our side of the home plate enters at a rule of thirds and then peaks on the right. It doesn't exit because it comes back down, but it peaks as though it would be going out a rule of thirds. Again, there's so much here. So when you're framing this on an empty area, what are you thinking?
Well, again, we did multiple cameras in the same location. So this was the tighter of that angle, and then we did a looser one of that angle.
Okay.
The looser one is always kind of your backup, see, because you can't, if it's loose, components are less likely to fall out of the frame. So, but if you're tight, then you're rolling the dice a bit more about what, you don't want to cut off extremities. And this was very fortunate. We're really close on some, but we didn't cut any off. But yeah, you kind of got to work in tandem. You got to be thinking about, okay, if I've got this camera at home plate, maybe I should be thinking about another camera for second base from a similar angle, different, just so you have everything covered. You roll the dice after you have the sure shot, if you've got, because I actually remember, and I wouldn't be able to find it very easily now, but I remember the loose picture of this being really good. It had the College World Series logo around the bottom, and it was nice. It was a good look.
But see, you just said something though. Had that runner's foot on this shot exited the frame, totally different shot.
Totally different. Yeah,
and for that matter, it wouldn't even need to exit. Had the runner's foot gotten ever so too close and too tight, it would have killed the old saying in photography, nose room, right? Somewhere for them to move into. It would have really killed that you could picture him sliding. So when you're triggering this, is it triggering automatically as you shoot the camera you're holding? Are you manually triggering this remotely?
Well, this is a good question. And I think I remember how I did it. I'm pretty sure this is how I would have done it. I would have taped the trigger next to my trigger on my camera. And then what I would have done, and this is I did this for a long time. You would essentially, by using Pocket Wizards, you would make your handheld camera a remote. And I know that sounds weird. So you run a trigger up near your shutter release on your camera. Then you run a Pocket Wizard out of that to back down to another Pocket Wizard will send a signal to your camera. So you have the remote, which you're following remotely, but then all of a sudden, not just the two remotes that are over there on pointed down, they're also firing the one in your hand. It seems like it shouldn't make any sense, but it does. but it's not conventional. It's pretty conventional now, probably because people have figured it out a little bit more.
Right.
But yeah, that's probably how it happened.
Well, and digital has made remote cameras so much more practical.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah,
by leaps and bounds. But again, the lighting here is the other thing. So the lighting is from the back and left, and yet the runner's face is totally clear, right? When you are, whether you're presetting a camera like this one up in a booth and walking away, which, my heart would be pounding the entire game thinking, oh, please come out, But even if you're just holding it, I'll admit it. There's no way I would have gotten well, I might have because I shoot live music. So I'm kind of used to radical dynamic light. But still, what is your baseline when it's, looking at the shadows on the ground, like their feet are in the air, but they're, only a foot or two off the ground, and yet they're casting long shadows. This light is low in the sky. When you're photographing a dynamic light scene like this, is there a baseline for exposing that you go by?
Well, I mean, again, this goes back to the transparency era in which, you really had to know what you were doing. This was a small window of light that happened at a game that started, I think it started at 8 o'clock at night. I think I always had a game that started at 8 o'clock. When at 8 o'clock in June in Omaha, Nebraska, you still got some light. It's low, but it's not going to last for long. This would have been in the first inning, I'm pretty sure. So
interesting.
A lot of that has to do with saying you're setting up, you're going to all this work at the stadium at 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon to start setting up these cameras for that night, and really not even for the whole night, probably just for the first 2 or 3 innings. After that, the light's going to be gone. You're just going to be shooting like a night game. So, it's like one of the things like where you feel compelled to put the effort in just because the possibility, particularly with this light, is so great that you want to take that chance.
Well, but with you shooting for an outlet like Sports Illustrated, which is media and press for all accounts, this is photojournalism, right? When you turn a shot like this in, do you edit it yourself? Do you turn it into them and they edit it?
Sports Illustrated, we always just turned it over to them.
And they do the editing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there exceptions to that with other stuff you shoot, like Olympics or something?
Not with Sports Illustrated, it never was. There was never really much exception to that. With other clients, it depends on what they want. I mean, a lot of times, if you work with a less experienced person in an art department, they may want you to work on as much as they can, because they're not experienced at doing it. But one of the things that I always try to emphasize is that, to me, I mean, I like, I'm pretty technical and I don't mind talking technique. But it's really the moment that matters. It's the moment that matters. That's, it's like if I blew the exposure third of the stop, whatever, we'll get it back in post, hopefully. But that moment, has to live. It has to be active. It has to be something that really tells the story.
So let's talk post then. In a scenario, if you were editing this, what would you be limited to? Cropping, dodging, same as a traditional darkroom. Cropping, dodging, burning, color correct. That's about it, right?
Yeah, that's about it. You can't do much in journalism. It's just a bad idea. You really need to represent what was there.
And when you edit, what software do you use?
I use Photoshop pretty much. I mean, I'm trying to convince myself to do Lightroom a little bit more, but I haven't yet. I still pretty much Photoshop. Photomechanic to Photoshop. Nothing too complicated.
I would have guessed Photomechanic. Photomechanic was a recommendation to me like 3 times by friends of mine. And, I don't know, Lightroom does my culling. Once I went with Photomechanic for my culling, everything changed. The speed of which I can turn a job around just cut in half. It was that fast. So let's do a speed round here really quick. And for these questions, there's like 5 of them. Just answer whatever comes to your mind first or whatever you think the best answer is. So first of all, top fast action photography tip.
Be ready. That's the number one. Got to be ready. Number 2, position yourself in the best place you can to make the best photograph that you can. That seems a little generic, but think about it in a more generic way, and that's what it is. Know your gear. No fumbling around out there, trying to figure out how to work your camera. And don't bother me if your camera doesn't work either. Like that's your responsibility to know when you get out there. So yeah, know your gear, know how to use it. You know, be nice. I try to be polite and nice to everybody that security guard, cheerleaders, whoever. I just think it's like you're representing somebody. You should try to do that. Now, what, one more?
Yeah, go ahead. I completely agree with you, by the way, and that is when I'm in a photo pit at a concert, I say hi to people. Hey, who you're shooting for? You're going to see these people again, number one. But you mentioned security, and I just want to say, in case anybody from security is watching, when I photograph a concert, some of the first people I say hi to are the security people. Yep. Their job, I would argue, is A, more difficult than mine, and B, more important than mine in many cases. Yep. So, I agree. And being ready, by the way, knowing your gear is part of that being ready, as is leaving your phone in your pocket and not being texting when the moment is happening. That type of thing. Okay. What's your favorite sports lens?
Sports lens? 400-28. 400-28, no doubt. Yeah.
Okay. Heavy lens. Wow.
Not the new one, though. It's like, seems light compared to the old ones, It's like, it's good. Yeah.
What app, like mobile app, can't you live without?
Well, I am not a huge, mobile app person, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask. My son works for Instagram, so that would be probably the one that I, reference the most.
Okay. And half shutter press for focus or back button focus?
Back button.
Okay. Favorite, there's a million compositional rules out there that we hear about. What's the compositional rule when you look at your photos that hits you first? That's the most important to you?
Yeah, I'm really upset with myself if I'm too center weighted. I mean, I should be a better photographer than that. As long as I've been doing it, I should know better than to put the person in the center of the frame.
Okay, so stay off. So you're thinking rule of thirds then?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, basic.
Okay.
Yeah,
and I should preface this. You can say your wife if you want to on this one, but you don't have to. Okay, you don't have to.
She's probably in there listening to all this stuff. So
yeah, exactly. And the funny thing is, she can't hear the questions. She's just hearing the answers. So you could say something like horse jumping, and she would not know what you meant, which could be fun. Honey, why did you say horse jumping earlier? So here's the question. Who's a photographer or artist that people may not know about that you think they should?
Well, I just saw someone today, and he's a new Canon Explorer Light, and I'd never seen his name before. He's in Los Angeles. He assisted for Andy Bernstein for a while, and I think maybe, have you had him on?
Atiba?
Yeah.
Is that who you're going to say?
Yeah.
Really
he's talented kid. I mean, really good. Seems like he's got a wonderful disposition, doesn't take himself too seriously. And one of the things that I've been saying for forever, God, we need more people of color, and that's, I think he's he's not an up and comer anymore because he's already there. I mean, but somebody that, I think has got a really bright future. And I've never met him. I have no idea who he is. I mean,
he is the nicest guy. He ended up on this show for the same reason you did, through our mutual friend Scott, that deals with Canon Explorers of Light program. And I was not completely aware of Atiba myself. Atiba assisted. He was a second shooter for the Lakers during the Shaq and Kobe years, but he is well known in the skateboard world, like at a very high level in the skateboard world. And I love what he shoots for kind of the same reason I like what you shoot. He has an ability with his subjects to capture that moment, right? That moment that makes you feel like you're standing there and watching it. And that, to me, just like what you shoot, is absolutely magic. So I want to remind everybody that everything we've talked about, and you've seen lower thirds popping up under Damian as we've been talking if you're watching the video version. But if you're watching the audio version, I do want you to be able to connect with Damian. So Damian, what's your website?
www.damianstrohmeyer.com.
Okay. And just so that people know, it's Strohmeyer, Damian, Damian. Instagram, It's Damian Stroh, just the Stroh.
Yep.
LinkedIn, Damian Strohmeyer, fully spelled out, and Facebook, just a dot in between the first and last name.
That's correct.
Well, sir, it was wonderful to meet you. All the links, again, in the show notes at the website, everybody. And Damian, thank you so very much for doing this. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Steve. I enjoyed it.
Believe me, it's been my pleasure. And again, everybody, if you head over to behindtheshot.tv, you can see a small bit that I wrote about Damian based on his bio and my research on him and a small gallery of his work. You can do that with every episode that I do. If you want to find out how to subscribe to the podcast, there are links to virtually every way you can subscribe there at the website as well. If you want to reach out to me, that's easy too. It's stevebrazill.com, same as the country Brazil, but 2 L's. If you want information on social media, Twitter or Instagram are where I generally spend my time. It's at Steve Brazill or at Behind the Shot TV. Again, thank you so much. Make sure you join us next time as we take a look inside a photographer's mind by looking behind the shot.